Thanks for joining us again today. We're on a journey to really embrace the heart of the Father, the fact that He loves us so much, and to be confident, just to rest in our identity in Jesus. And out of that, that's the place where we're going to produce lasting fruit. So we've been in some conversations with my good friend Steve. We've talked about sweet spots, things that we lean into. We've talked about discipleship, and now we're in a conversation about lordship. What does it mean to put Jesus first, and why? Today we want to just grapple with why does Jesus get to be Lord? I mean, that might sound silly, but really, I mean, why not you, Steve, or Todd, or I don't even want to say it, but I mean, why not me? I mean, those questions come up for people. That's really where the rubber meets the road with some people. It's like, well, why don't I get to be in charge of my own life?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a story. I've mentioned Winkie Pratney a few times, his influence on my life through his writings and also his teaching. He told a story. What he would do, he's from New Zealand. He was trained as a chemist, so he was a smart guy. But then he continued to read widely. He was reading 5 or 6 books a week or something like that. But he would always read widely, different subjects, whether history, whatever. He would just read widely, and he would go to university campuses in America and do evangelism. And one of his strategies was to ask students to get him into any class that the professors would allow him to come in. This was many years ago, and he would be, because he read so widely, he could talk about just about any topic. But he would always shift it around to the Lordship of Christ. And he had a student raise a hand, and this is way old school. You know, raising a hand and asking a question. He acknowledged the student. He said, "You have a question?" "Yes, sir." He said, "Stand up, ask your question." And the student said, "Why is Jesus Lord?" And Winkie said, "Do you have an alternative suggestion?" And the student said, "Why not me?" And Winkie said, "Well, that's easy. You're not wise enough or loving enough. Sit down." So I think he said it in a gentle way. He wasn't trying to embarrass his team. He was just trying to make it clear to us, like, great suggestion, good try, but I don't think you or me, and none of us are there. We don't compare to Him. And so when we think about why is Jesus Lord, one thing that, again, Winkie really influenced me here with this idea. In Matthew chapter 13 and verse 44, it says, Jesus is speaking, he says, "The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in the field, which a man found and hid again. And from joy over it, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field." And the idea here, one of the ideas, here's lots of ideas there, is this, what Winkie called was that value creates obligation. So there was a treasure, he discovered a treasure in that field, and the value of that treasure created a joyful obligation in him to go and sell everything to purchase the field. So he was responding to the value of the treasure.
That's good.
To make a radical commitment, which was to sell everything that he had.
He saw something.
Yeah.
And he saw the value.
Absolutely.
And that gave him joy to do it. It wasn't like sometimes, and I guess I still can go there, but early on in trying to figure out, was I even following Jesus, was this whole sense of obligation that wasn't motivated by love. It was just fear. And but when you have a revelation of who Jesus is and the value that's there, then the obligation piece is actually a joyful part of the journey.
Yeah. The more I leaned into this understanding, the more it freed me then to joyfully respond to Him as Lord, as compared to maybe you've done this, maybe many of us have done this, where we think, I just need to try harder. I just need to I need to sweat more. So it doesn't mean we don't put effort into following Jesus, but it was more like, I need to try harder in order to do this, because I'm not doing very well at following Him sometimes. When maybe the answer, or the best way to approach that, is what I need more than anything else is not to try harder, but to get a clearer picture of who He is. I need a fresh revelation of His value, of His wonder, and of His beauty. All of us respond to beauty. All of us respond to value. It's a life principle. It's a universal principle that God's created for us as humans. And so when we see Jesus, we see His value and His beauty, then it should be like His value and beauty, in a sense, extracts a response from us. And so the reason why Jesus is Lord is because He's the most wise and the most loving. And it becomes a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Who should I trust? Should I trust myself to be in charge of my life?
Not if I'm not the most wise.
Or should I trust someone who loves me more than I love myself and is wiser than me? So it's really a value piece.
I love the package there. You talk about both those things because they can't be separated, but I think maybe I try to. It's like, well, that's smart. Well, smart doesn't mean wise, but it's like, but when somebody really has our best interests in mind, when they really are for us, then the response that they get to be Lord, that we put them first, is a win-win. Yes, it's ultimately because He's God and He's good, but at the same time, He says we seek Him because He's a rewarder. Mm-hmm. And so that shows that piece that there's something in it that's going to bless me. And when I become confident of that submitting to His Lordship and doing things His way is actually going to be powerful in my own life, it's going to be life-giving, it sure makes it a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, in Matthew 16, around verse 25 or so, Jesus said this, if any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would seek to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake shall find it. You're like, oh my goodness, there's a lot in there. What in the world do you mean? But it's to anyone. If any man would come after me, any person would come after me, let him deny himself. So you say no to yourself. And there are many ways we say no to ourselves. And it says, take up your cross. And the implication here is, if you're going to follow me, you're going to die.
Yeah.
And it's not that we're going to execute you per se. Not that, like, it's not necessarily referring to, following Jesus could lead to some type of physical death, but it's really like we're going to get rid of the old Steve and do a whole new thing.
Yes.
We're going to put the old Steve to death by faith. So you're going to have to let go. And said, and then follow me. So literally we follow Jesus as Lord as dead men or dead people, right? It's like, that's the idea. But then this whole thing, whoever seeks to save his life, and saving would be like holding on to, keeping, preserving. So he's saying, if you just squeeze and grip your life and hang on to it and hold it, you'll never have life. But if you'll release it, he who loses his life for my sake will find it. So it does take faith. This whole thing of submitting to Jesus as Lord is like, because of His value, He's the most loving, the most wise, I'm going to yield my life to Him. Boy, to open up your hand, it's almost like you have the worst case of arthritis or something. It's like, I can't do it. It's like, this is scary. Do I trust Him? And so it's a life exchange. I give up my life to you because you're worthy to rule me. Because of your great love, your great value, great beauty. I trust you with my life. So therefore, here it is. And He takes it, and then He exchanges or gives us the life He wants us to have, the Christ life, the Jesus life that He wants us to have. And that's a process. But that does take faith. It's not just a mental thing like saying, okay, Jesus is Lord. No, it's like a wedding day. You actually have to get up on the stage and say, I do.
Yes.
And that changes everything, right?
Yeah.
Christy actually went home with you, right? She's
she
been
did.
Hanging around ever since.
She did.
Yeah.
And it's been joyful.
Changed everything.
It changes everything. So even just circling back around to that, as you talk about that process, whether it's for the first time somebody needs to say yes to Jesus as Lord, or whether it's an area where we didn't realize it, but as we pause, we realize, man, I'm gripping this, I'm holding on to it myself. And maybe it's something you've already said today, but what is one thing that you found to be key in just letting go and making sure that, at least in this specific area, that He's Lord, and hopefully that flows to other areas as well? What would that look like?
This is going to sound maybe too simple, but sometimes in ministering to people who are struggling or whatever, I've seen this happen dealing with demonic oppression, things like that. Not that I'm some kind of expert in that realm. It's establishing who's in charge. I asked somebody recently who was really, really struggling, and I feel like there was a lot of demonic work, stuff like that going on with this person. And I looked at them and said, is Jesus the Lord of your life? I said, this is a yes or no question. They could not answer the question yes or no. They gave me a long explanation. And I said, that's not what I'm asking. So you've got to nail things down. So I would say that a simple thing to do is if you've never really settled it, then you need to settle it in your heart between you and Jesus. Say, here's my life. It's yours. And you also need to confess it to someone else. It'd be very healthy to a friend, whoever, spouse, whoever it is, say, you know what, I've settled it last night or yesterday or this morning. Jesus is the Lord of my life. Confess him as Lord to someone else. If you're not water baptized, that's the one way you do that. And then if you are, you say, man, Jesus has been the Lord of my life. Then I would do something, a simple application would be celebrate it. Celebrate it. Find some way to celebrate it. And give him thanks, because the more we see his beauty and wonder and value, then the more it becomes a privilege to follow him as Lord. We think, man, I won the lottery 100 times over to have Jesus as my Lord.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, Steve, for sharing with us. And thank you for joining us. And before you go, I just want to reiterate what Steve said. Let's establish or reestablish. We got to nail it down that Jesus is in charge. Who's in charge? Hopefully you can say with us, Jesus is in charge. He's Lord of my life. And hopefully you walk in the freedom of that. God bless you.